It started as a bright, crisp morning in New York City, the kind of day Good Morning America was made for: polished smiles, warm banter, and celebrity charm wrapped neatly for America's breakfast table. George Stephanopoulos, always calm, always in control, sat poised behind the iconic glass desk. Across from him, Samuel L. Jackson leaned back in his chair, a picture of quiet confidence in a charcoal suit and tinted glasses. He was there to promote his latest film, The Last Verdict, a political thriller already stirring Oscar buzz. The cameras rolled, the lights blazed, and the world tuned in, expecting another smooth, star-studded morning segment. The opening was lighthearted. George began with compliments about the film's success. Jackson responded with his trademark humor. They joked about his decades-long career, the wild roles he'd played, and the way audiences never seemed to tire of that unmistakable voice. For a few minutes, everything was perfect, the chemistry was easy, the audience laughed at all the right moments. But as George shuffled his cue cards, his expression shifted, signaling a change in tone. "Samuel," he began, his voice smooth but edged with formality, "you recently made some comments about how Hollywood still struggles with diversity and the kinds of opportunities offered to veteran black actors. Some critics thought your remarks were divisive. Do you stand by what you said?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jackson blinked once, his posture tightening slightly. Then came that unmistakable chuckle, deep, sharp, and just a bit dangerous. "Divisive," he repeated, leaning forward. "George, I've been doing this for 50 years. I'm not in the business of dividing people. I'm in the business of telling the truth." George nodded politely, trying to maintain his calm. "Of course, and I think everyone respects your perspective." But Jackson cut him off, his voice firm now. "See, that's the thing. Folks always respect your perspective, until you say something they don't like. Then suddenly, you're the problem." He tapped a finger on the desk, his tone low and controlled. "When I talk about bias, I'm talking about the system I've lived in, the system that decides who gets cast, who gets funded, and who gets ignored. That's not an opinion, George. That's reality." The audience was silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras had stopped moving, sensing something electric brewing. George adjusted his tie, pressing forward with his journalist composure. "I understand what you're saying," he replied carefully, "but some people might argue that your words put the industry in a negative light, especially when—" "Negative light," Jackson interrupted again, his voice rising slightly. "Man, if the truth makes you look bad, maybe you need a better light." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience, but his eyes stayed locked on George. "I've worked with legends, I've seen greatness, and I've seen nonsense. I've earned the right to speak on it." George smiled, the kind of tight, polite smile meant to diffuse tension. "I think our viewers might appreciate a less confrontational tone this early in the morning," he said softly, trying to regain footing. Jackson laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was sharp, heavy with disbelief. "Less confrontational? George, you invited me here to talk. Don't act surprised when I do it honestly. If you wanted fluff, you should have called somebody else." The studio air grew thick. George hesitated, aware the moment was teetering on live television's most dangerous edge, unpredictability. "Samuel, I think perhaps we're misunderstanding each other," he said finally. Jackson's demeanor shifted. The humor vanished, replaced with cool finality. "No misunderstanding, George," he said, pushing his chair back. "You asked a question, I gave an answer. You just didn't like it." He stood, straightening his jacket, his presence filling the room even more as he rose. Cameras still rolling, Jackson glanced toward the audience, then back at George. "You know what's funny," he said, shaking his head slowly. "People ask for honesty like it's some fancy dish. Then they taste it and spit it out." And with that, he walked off the set, smooth, deliberate, and unapologetic. The camera caught the moment perfectly, the back of Samuel L. Jackson's head as he strode past the cameras, leaving George frozen behind the desk, his practiced expression faltering just long enough for the world to see surprise flicker in his eyes. The show cut abruptly to commercial, the control room in chaos, producers shouting over each other about damage control. But the internet had already captured it. Within minutes, clips of Jackson's walk-off were being shared across social media. It was supposed to be another easy morning segment. Instead, it became the moment that would replay endlessly. Samuel L. Jackson, unfiltered, unbothered, and unafraid to walk away when the truth became too much for morning television to handle. The fallout was immediate and unstoppable. Within an hour of Samuel L. Jackson walking off Good Morning America, the clip had spread across every social platform: TikTok, X, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. Millions watched as Jackson stood up, delivered his cutting line about tasting honesty, and exited the studio without a glance back. By noon, it was the top trending story worldwide. The headlines ranged from Samuel L. Jackson explodes on live TV to Jackson walks out after Stephanopoulos clash over race in Hollywood. Fans and commentators alike took sides. On social media, Jackson's supporters flooded the feeds with praise. "That's what real integrity looks like," one tweet read. Another said, "Samuel didn't walk off, he walked tall." People clipped his best lines from the exchange, turning them into sound bites, edits, and memes. Someone even slowed down the moment he adjusted his jacket before walking away, overlaying it with dramatic music. It became an anthem of standing one's ground. Meanwhile, Good Morning America found itself in a full-blown PR scramble. Producers held emergency meetings behind closed doors, trying to craft a response that wouldn't alienate either Jackson's fans or their morning audience. George Stephanopoulos stayed silent that morning, appearing visibly shaken in the next segment but carrying on as if nothing had happened. By the next day, however, his silence was broken. In a brief statement during the show's opening, George said calmly, "Samuel L. Jackson is a legend and someone I deeply respect. Our conversation took a turn that neither of us expected, and I regret that it ended the way it did." He smiled softly at the camera, his voice measured, his image carefully rebuilt. But viewers weren't entirely convinced. The comment sections were divided. Some praised George for professionalism, others accused him of backtracking to save face. Jackson, meanwhile, remained silent for nearly 48 hours, fueling even more curiosity. Reporters camped outside his New York apartment, paparazzi trailed his car, and entertainment journalists dissected his every public appearance. Finally, his publicist released a statement that only deepened his legend. Mr. Jackson does not apologize for walking away from a conversation that stopped being real. He believes authenticity is not confrontation, it's clarity. That single quote went viral, again. Fans printed it on t-shirts, posted it in motivational reels, and shared it under the tag #Jackson was right. Even celebrities chimed in. Jamie Foxx tweeted, "Sam always been the realest. Respect." Viola Davis reposted the clip with the caption, "Sometimes silence speaks louder, but sometimes walking away says it all." Back at ABC, executives debated whether to invite Jackson back for reconciliation, but their PR team quickly shut that idea down. "Let's not pour gasoline on the fire," one producer reportedly said. "We need this story to cool off, not explode again." But by then, it was too late. The story had transcended entertainment, it had become a cultural moment. Talk shows, podcasts, and late-night hosts all weighed in. A week later, Jackson made his first public appearance since the walk-off, not on Good Morning America, but on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The crowd erupted as soon as he stepped onto the stage. Colbert grinned, welcoming him with open arms. "So," Colbert began playfully, "you've made quite the impression on morning television." Jackson smirked. "Man, I wasn't trying to make an impression," he said, drawing laughter. "I just realized when a conversation stops being honest, it stops being worth having." The audience cheered so loudly that Colbert had to pause his next question. Over the next few minutes, Jackson spoke candidly about what happened. "I wasn't mad," he explained. "I was disappointed. You can't invite someone to speak their truth and then act surprised when it doesn't fit your script. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when I'm being handled." The clip became another viral sensation. News outlets praised his composure and self-awareness. Even those who initially criticized his walk-off began to see it differently. It wasn't an explosion, it was a boundary. It was a refusal to let his voice be twisted into something palatable. In the weeks that followed, The Last Verdict, his new film, enjoyed a box office surge, its themes of corruption and integrity suddenly resonating in a new light. Interviews that might have gone unnoticed before were now eagerly shared. Viewers saw Jackson not just as a movie star, but as a man who had refused to be silenced by the politeness of daytime TV. George Stephanopoulos, for his part, carried on, though with a noticeable shift. His next few interviews were gentler, more introspective. Insiders whispered that the clash with Jackson had changed him, made him more careful about tone, more aware of the power dynamics at play when speaking with someone whose truth came from lived experience. Months later, when both men attended the same charity gala in Los Angeles, cameras captured a brief, unexpected moment, George and Samuel shaking hands. No words, no drama, just a mutual nod. It wasn't forgiveness or friendship, but perhaps acknowledgement, two professionals who had collided on live TV, both forever marked by the moment. In the end, what began as a tense exchange became something larger. Samuel L. Jackson's walk-off wasn't just an act of defiance, it became a statement. It reminded people that even in an age of polished soundbites and scripted smiles, truth still has power. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all, just the sound of your footsteps as you walk away, knowing you didn't bend for anyone.